In the last part of this series, we were introduced to the 80s by understanding how the major voice of our programming was placed into control. We learned about the great communicator, the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. It was through Reagan where the country was walked and transitioned into major change. We have spoken a lot about the economic changes, for through that economic change, there was a change in our values that we have been affected by to this day severely. It did not happen overnight, and it did not start in the 80s, but it was locked in and solidified in this decade of the 80s. In order to discuss the changes that took place in the 80s, it's important that I do not leave out the important tools that were used in order to guide the public through the 70s into the 80s. While I was making this content that led us into the 80s, I could not ignore the segmenting of the demographics that occurred within our television, as well as within the public as the economy began to transition from being a manufacturer-driven economy to a consumer-driven economy. In order to understand the 80s, we need to examine the economic state of the different demographics in the United States and look at the rise of the television sitcom that was put in place to navigate the different demographics through the transition. The 70s was the time where we saw the divide in groups on the television. It changed from being just a divide between what adults watch and children watch, but then to white suburban versus programming for the poor Negro community. We are going to discuss the sitcoms of the 70s and the mind control that came along with them. Let's begin. Okay, so as you go through this history leading into the 80s, it's easy to try to lump everyone together. Because of the civil rights movement, there was a mental program in America that told the masses that everyone is a part of the same community. But that is a mental program, and depending on what community you were a part of, you might believe it and blame issues on the people, or you might not believe that agenda about equality at all, and you would know it's just a lie. I cannot move into the 80s without explaining the separation within the white community and the Negro community in America. There was a major separation between these groups as a whole, and what was happening during the 70s was promoting the major shift that led us into the 80s. Now we know the major backdrop that was going on with Nixon and the presidents. In part 6, I discussed how we got to Ronald Reagan. But we need to go back into the 70s and discuss the different communities in America. In the beginning of the Mind Control series, I believe it was part 2, I discussed the conditions in the 50s that created the middle class in America after World War II. The GI Bill created the suburbs and middle class in America. And through its application, it drastically discriminated against the Negroes that fought in World War II, compared with their white counterparts. The application of the GI Bill with the Negro veterans is a known discrimination that the Veterans Affairs Office today even admits, so it cannot be said that this is my own thought. There was a separation between classes, and it started in the 50s, and that gap really began to get wider as we moved into the 70s, and it completely expanded in the 80s. Now, we know there are 3 social classes in America. We have the rich, the poor, and the middle class. We will not discuss the rich in this series. Let's be clear that it was the wealthy class at the very top of the food chain, the top 1% of the rich, that had been the unseen hand guiding the whole 3 classes in America, distributing their wealth and power through their corporations, organizations, and their swing and reach through the political system. So we will not discuss them. They were the ones doing the mind control. They were not the ones being mind controlled. Well, not the ones at the top at least. Now, it cannot be said that there were not economic problems for all during the 70s. Everyone faced it. But what is probably not understood is how the problems affected the different communities differently. For instance, I want to look at this chart from the United States government. It is a chart of the civilian unemployment rate in the United States from 1964 to 2010. On this chart, you can track the unemployment rate from the 70s. In 1971, the unemployment rate was 5.9%. 72, 5.6%. 73, 4.9%. 74, when things started to really go bad, went back up to 5.6%. 75, 8.5%. 76, 7.7. 77, 7.1. 78, 6.1. And 79, 5.8. That was the unemployment rate in the 70s. Unemployment in the 70s for civilian workers never really went under 5%. but it was proportionately different between the white community and the Negro community. So this red line right here will be the national unemployment rate. Now, if you look deeper at the unemployment rate, you will notice the rate for white workers was always less than the overall rate. If this economy was equal, the rate would be equal. But that is not the case. For whites, 71, it was 5.4%. 72, 5.1%. 73, 4.3. 74, 5.0. 75, 7.8. And these are the other numbers going up to 79, which ended at 5.1%. Then when you look at the Negro community, you can see something that was drastically different. The number was always at least 100% higher than it was in white America. In 79, 9.9%. 72, 10.4%. 73, 9.4%. 74, 10.5%. 75, 14.8%. Ending at 79, 12.3%. These are big differences. What the numbers are not showing is that the 70s furthered the divide of the middle class and poor in America. There was an economic divide that was widening. Lack of economic opportunities led to poverty in the black community. Where there is poverty and people struggling to survive spurs violence and crime. Many black men returned to crime as that was their only opportunities to live. The movie Dead Presidents depicted this well. When the young brother did his thing in the war and came back to no opportunities, he tried as hard as he could, but he was not able to provide for his family. But a pimp in the neighborhood was able to provide because he wasn't depending on the system. And so with limited opportunities, black men resorted to crime. And even though the hypocrisy was that white-collar crime back then was estimated to cost society over $100 billion a year, compared to the $2.5 billion from street crimes, the prisons were occupied largely by lower-income Negro Americans. During the 70s, whites were jailed at a rate of 43.5 per 100,000, while blacks were imprisoned 367.5 per 100,000. The sentences of blacks averaged 20% longer than whites. During the 70s, the unemployment rate for blacks increased dramatically, as did the prison population. There was a direct correlation. Lack of economic opportunities and extreme poverty led black men to desperation and crime. Of all new employees entering the private industry between 1974 and 1977, 53% were white women, 26% were white men, 5% were black women, and black men experienced no net gain in their numbers, which is why they needed laws like affirmative action. This is the period of time when the Negro community became synonymous with the poor class.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Look, folks, these are junk fees. They're unfair and they hit marginalized Americans the hardest, especially low-income folks and people of color.
Like I said, it was bad for everyone, but particularly bad in the Negro community, especially with Negro men. There are many changes happening in these communities. Though there were social upheavals, the powers that be were really able to keep a hold on the communities and really control how far those that were being affected by these economic problems, they controlled how far they would go and that they did not collapse society on their own. These people were sedated and controlled enough in order to bring everyone into the 80s where the change would begin. The control that was over the public was not a control by force like through the police. Well, in the Negro community, it definitely was. There was definitely control by the police. This is a chart from the United States Department of Justice. In August of 2003, they made a special report, Prevalence of Imprisonment in the United States Population, 1974 to 2001. On Table 5, their chart of the percent of adult population ever incarcerated in a state or federal prison by gender, race, and Hispanic origin shows that in 1974, the percentage of whites who were never incarcerated was at 0.8%, while the Negro community was 4.5%, Hispanics at 1.3%. But digging even deeper, when looking at men, of white males, 1.4% were ever incarcerated, only 1.4%, while Negro men, 8.7% of them. That's almost 10% of Negro men in the country being incarcerated at some point. If you follow the numbers throughout the decades, that number only increases. So we can definitely say that through these harsh economic conditions, one way they engaged in control was through the policing of a community that had the hardest economic conditions and opportunities. As I said earlier, lack of economic opportunity leads to poverty. Where there is poverty and people struggling to survive spurs violence and crime. If you don't think that's true, wait till this whole system collapses. The same people that judge the Negro community and calls them criminals are going to be engaging in the same activity, but even worse. But I'm getting off subject. What I'm saying is that there was a control by force in certain communities, but one of the main centers of control was through the television. Now, as we discuss the rise of the television, it is important to understand that although in the 60s, there were certain men like Bill Cosby and Diane Carroll who were on the television, there were not shows that were directly marketed to the Negro community before the 70s. As the economic problems began to occur, they began to direct their mind control at the Negroes directly. This was from the rise of Norman Lear and the sitcom. They began to make shows that directly targeted the Negroes. The population was being segmented. The first one in the 70s was Sanford & Son. But before I get there, it's important to understand what was happening at that time on the television. Before Sanford & Son, Norman Lear already introduced Archie Bunker with All in the Family, which aired on CBS January 12, 1971 to April 8, 1979. When looking at these series, you want to look at when they started and when they stopped, because it shows how long the mind control lasted. This sitcom, All in the Family, brought race and other societal issues to the mainstream. Now, here's a tip. If you want to ever investigate these things on your own and you want to understand the mind control that was being used, you should know that they oftentimes told you what the mission and mental programming of each show was through the theme song. This was All in the Family.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Songs that made the hit parade.
Guys like us, we had it made. Those were the days.
And you do when you want it.
Dance for girls and men were men. Mister, we could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. Didn't need no welfare state.
Everybody pulled his weight.
G.R.O. LaSalle ran great. Those were the days.
Do you see it? Archie Bunker was a racist, and he had racial views as well as other views that were highlighted on the television. All in the Family was about a working class white American family living in Queens, New York. Its patriarch was Archie Bunker, an outspoken, narrow-minded man seemingly prejudiced against everyone who was not like him or his idea of how people should be. Archie's wife Edith was sweet and understanding, though somewhat naive and uneducated. They used her character to try to illustrate what old-fashioned ideas of men and women did to women. Their daughter was a feminist, and she was married to a college, later graduate student, whose values are influenced and shaped by the counterculture of the 60s. The same counterculture I discussed in part 3 and 4 through the rise of hippies and civil rights. That's what he was a part of.
I don't believe this.
Well, you don't believe it because you're an atheist. You don't believe in God.
Arch, if there is a God, why is there so much unhappiness in this world?
If there is a God, why is there so much unhappiness in this world? I'll answer that question for you, buddy. There is... Eat it! If there is a God, why is there so much... Get out of the window there! Can't you answer some of these questions over here?
What was the question?
Why did God put so much unhappiness in the world?
Oh. Well, maybe so's when we get to heaven, we'll notice the improvement.
The two couples, Archie and his wife, and Michael, the son-in-law, and his wife, they represent the real-life clash of values between the greatest generation and baby boomers. For much of the series, the son-in-law and Archie's daughter live in the Bunker's home to save money, providing abundant opportunity for them to irritate each other. Now, if you go back to the theme song, it spoke of the parents of the baby boomers, who they call the greatest generation, and how they were nostalgic and wanted to go back to what they looked at as the good old days. This is definitely the MAGA crowd of today. They brought this divide of the generations right in the center on the main screen and walked everyone through it. It was not just race, but also the hippie culture, the feminist movement, and the sexual revolution. We are talking about a show that spoke directly to white America and was a major influence in guiding them through the thoughts of the 70s and how they were being transitioned. Today, we go through our lives and just look at where we are currently as a society, but we don't really like reviewing how we got here. If you watch these things, they were able to move us through comedy. The delivery of Archie Bunker, it was hilarious, even if what he said offended me sometimes. And through this tool, they were able to deal with the controversy and the changing of opinion through comedy and laughter. Think about it, the things that Archie Bunker said back in the day, he would absolutely be canceled for today. It was a different world. The unspoken truth was that this was the reality that was in the homes across America, and what the television was doing was carefully walking us down through it. Like I said, if he said these things today, he would be canceled. But because that was the thought in mainstream, it was able to be on the television. And so from this understanding, I want you to examine the major shows at that time in the 70s. After All in the Family came Maude. This show aired from September 12, 1972 until April 22, 1978, also on CBS. Maude starred Bea Arthur as Maude, an outspoken, middle-aged, politically liberal woman living in suburban Tuckahoe, New York, with her fourth husband, household appliance store owner Walter Finlay. Maude embraced the tenets of women's liberation. She always voted for Democratic Party candidates and advocated for civil rights and racial and gender equality.
I know that I cannot put up with a whole weekend of your archaic views on gay people.
What's wrong with my views on gay people? Do you approve of homosexuals?
Arthur, it doesn't matter whether I approve or I disapprove. They are human beings. They exist. It's like asking me if I approve of dwarfs.
Her overbearing and sometimes domineering personality often got her into trouble when speaking about those issues. This is what the show was about, though. It was clearly mind control. As you review the world that was happening during these times, and then look at these programs, you have to be really ignorant to not see that they were developing programming that guided the thoughts of everyone as they moved the public through these changes of society. Just look at the characters that they created in these programs and the subjects that they dealt with. They made sure that they were characters that dealt with the mindset changes that they wanted us to navigate through. I highlight All in the Family and Maude because they were at the top of the rankings in the television in the 70s. If we don't look at how they directly targeted our minds, it'll be very hard to understand the 80s. You see, we look at these programs right now and we see them as reruns, but when they were being brought out, they were a mainstream time, prime time television. So, in the beginning of the 70s, we had those two major shows, All in the Family and Maude. But those shows were directly targeted to middle white suburban America. This is not to say that Negroes in America did not watch those shows, especially Maude. I know that they watched Maude. But as I said, in the 60s, our television shows were not diverse, meaning they generally targeted two demographics, adults and children. But when we get into the 70s, because the agendas were changing, they started creating content that directly spoke to the different demographics. This was called segmenting. All in the Family and Maude specifically dealt with white working class suburban neighborhood. And with the success of All in the Family, Norman Lear began to target the Negroes. Sanford and Son was created shortly after All in the Family. This was a sitcom television series that ran on NBC television network from January 14th, 1972 to March 25th, 1977. The series was taken by Norman Lear and considered NBC's answer to CBS's All in the Family. Now, they did not start this series with explaining the mind control through the theme song. They simply brought Negroes onto a television program that was directly targeted to them. Sanford and Son starred Red Fox as Fred G. Sanford, a widower and junk dealer living on the South Central Avenue in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, and Damon Wilson as his son, Lamont Sanford. In the show, Fred moved to South Central Los Angeles from his hometown, St. Louis, during his youth. After the show premiered in 1972, newspapers touted Fox as NBC's answer to Archie Bunker, the bigoted white protagonist of All in the Family. Both shows were adapted by Norman Lear. The character of Fred Sanford was known for his bigotry and bad temper. The character of Lamont Sanford was Fred's long-suffering, diligent peacemaker son. At times, both characters involved themselves in schemes, usually as a means of earning cash quickly to pay off their various debts. This was the first major beginning into luring the Negroes to targeted, segmented television. And after this program takes hold, starts the real mind control. In 1974, as things started to take a turn for the worse economically, is when we see Norman Lear come with the sitcom Good Times, a television sitcom that aired for 6 seasons on CBS from February 8, 1974 to August 1, 1979.
Temporary layoffs.
Good times. Easy credit rip-offs. Good times.
Scratching and surviving.
Good times. Hanging in a jive. Good times. If we lucky, we got 'em. Good times.
Can you see that mind control? As they were going bad, they created a series that was able to guide the Negro community through it. It should be noted that the writers for these shows were not Negroes either. This was not a Negro show created by Negro writers. It was white Americans writing the jokes and content for the Negroes in America. What was this show about? Florida and James Evans and their 3 children living in a public housing project in a poor black neighborhood in inner city Chicago. Florida and James Evans struggle to raise their kids, artist JJ, voice of reason Thelma, and politically active Michael. When the series begins, JJ is 17, portrayed by 26-year-old Jimmy Walker, who was just 8 years younger than co-star John Amos. Thelma was 16, Michael was 11. It was television's first Negro 2-parent family sitcom. Good Times was a spin-off of Maude, which itself is a spin-off of All in the Family. The characters originated on the sitcom Maude as Florida and Henry Evans, with Florida employed as Maude Finlay's housekeeper in Tuckahoe, New York, and Henry employed as a New York City firefighter. When producers decided to feature the Florida character in her own show, they changed the character's history to fit a new series, changing their black middle-class family into a poverty-stricken lower-class family. Henry's name became James. He worked various odd jobs, if at all. There was no mention of Maude, but it was mentioned that Florida was a maid once before. Episodes of Good Times deal with the characters' attempts to overcome poverty, living in high-rise public housing in Chicago. James Evans often works at least 2 jobs, mostly manual labor such as dishwasher, construction labor, etc. Though he is often unemployed, he is a proud man who will not accept charity. He sometimes hustled money playing pool. They did not start this program with hope. They started depicting Negroes where they were. And though they started with a 2-parent household, as Esther Roll says, she demanded if she was going to be a part of the sitcom.
I give a lot of that to Esther Roll because she wanted a husband on the show. They wanted to do it without a husband. And she said, no, I want a husband on the show because I was raised with a father and a mother, and I know I was raised with a father and a mother, and I wanted America to see that black men stay with their families and raise their children.
Right.
After 3 seasons in 1976, they killed James off and made the family a single-parent household like they wanted to start with. In the series, they introduced new ideas directly into the Negro community, like when Florida Evans begins dating and became engaged to Carl Dixon. Carl was an atheist. Good Times was intended to be a show to deal with serious topics in a comedic way, while providing positive characters for viewers to identify with. That's what they say.
The only Jesus I know is him, and the one thing he don't need is a partner.
Mama, how do we know Jesus wasn't black? He could have been from the lost tribe of Israel. They were supposed to be black.
I bet they were. If ever people were lost, we're it.
However, it was Walker's character of JJ that actually caught on. And Esther Roll and John Amos, they did not like the direction of the show, especially with JJ's tomfoolery and his buffoonish behavior. It was creating stereotypes that they did not like. Roll was vocal about her hate of his character. In a 1975 interview with Ebony magazine, she stated, "He's 18 and he doesn't work. He can't read or write. He doesn't think. The show didn't start out to be that. Little by little, with the help of the artists, I suppose, because they couldn't do that to me, they have made JJ more stupid and enlarged the role. Negative images have been slipped in on us through the character of the oldest child. This is what she said. The show is a major tool that was a major part of the Negro community. But though it seemed like a Negro show, it was something completely written and directed and produced by the white community, using it as a tool to guide the thoughts of Negroes as they dealt with the problems during the decade of the 70s. The next leg of programming was to deliver hope to the Negroes, and this came through The Jeffersons, which aired on CBS from January 18, 1975 to July 2, 1985, lasting 11 seasons, one of the longest running sitcoms in history.
Well, we're moving on now to the side, to the deluxe apartments in the sky. We're moving on now to the side. We finally got a piece of the pie. Fish don't fry in the kitchen, beans don't burn on the grill. Took a whole lot of trying just to get up that hill. Now we're up in the big leagues, getting our turn at bat. As long as we live, it's you and me, baby. There ain't nothing wrong with that. We're moving on up to the side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky. We're moving on up to the side. We finally got a piece of the pie.
The mind control of this song is real strong. It confirmed to the Negro their place in the world, but it also gave them a sense of hope and a chance to come up. The show focuses on George and Louise Jefferson, a prosperous Negro couple who had been able to move from Queens to Manhattan owing to the success of George's dry cleaning chain, Jefferson Cleaners. The show was launched as the second spinoff of All in the Family after Maude, on which the Jeffersons had been the neighbors of Archie and Edith Bunker. The show is another creation of Norman Lear. They say the idea of the Jeffersons moving on up came after 3 members of the Black Panthers who are fans of Lear's production visited Lear's CBS office, raising issues with the creator over the portrayal of black people on television, like I spoke about with JJ. This is what they say. This complaint was specifically due to Lear's Maude spin-off series Good Times. They said every time you see a black man on the tube, he is dirt poor, wears bad clothing, and cannot afford anything. Lear wrote that in his autobiography. They say it was from the Black Panther Party, but I tend to believe it was from the Boule, but who knows? But let's keep discussing the Jeffersons. During the January 11th, 1975 episode of All in the Family, titled The Jeffersons Move Up, Edith Bunker gave a tearful goodbye to her neighbor Louise Jefferson as her husband George, their son Lionel, and she moved from a working-class section of Queens, New York, into the luxurious Colby East. In their deluxe apartment in the sky, Louise made friends with Tom and Helen Willis, an interracial couple with 2 adult children of their own. The show was the first to prominently feature a married interracial couple. The Jeffersons eventually evolved into more of a traditional sitcom, but episodes occasionally focused on serious issues such as alcoholism, racism, suicide, gun control, being transgender, the KKK, and adult illiteracy. The thoughts that were throughout this sitcom cannot be understated. They depicted a new upper class in the Negro community, but it was a major show that promoted hope in the Negro community that they can gain their piece of the pie. That's why they're moving on up. The Jeffersons stayed on television the longest because of the mind control it led to with the Negro community that led us into the 80s. I'll probably bring this sitcom up again in the next episode of this series. The next show that I'll deal with in the 70s is What's Happening. What's Happening is a television series that first aired on ABC from August 5th, 1976, premiering as a summer series. It returned as a weekly series from 1976 until its April 79 conclusion. What's Happening followed the lives of 3 working-class Negro teens living in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Watts. They made a program for the Negro teens and helped direct their thought as they navigated through the 70s. It was a show that was set to help with race relations and was a roadmap for the youth trying to navigate through the system. They used that show as a mental tool that would help walk Negroes into the 80s. Throughout the 70s, there was mental programs that promoted hope within the Negro community, and were helping them navigate and attach to white culture of America, which is where we see shows like Different Strokes come onto the scene. But Different Strokes is more about the 80s than the 90s, so I won't discuss it yet. My point is that if you analyze the programming from the 70s, you can clearly see how they use these tools to direct these different demographics. Like I said, promoting hope within the Negro community while helping them navigate and attach to the white culture of America. And within suburban white America, it kept this community in a state of nostalgia, hoping for the good old days to come back. During the 70s, while all the economic problems were occurring, they began segmenting our programming. For instance, they created programming for suburban middle America that kept them complacent, waiting for change. Look at the programming. The biggest one was Happy Days, a sitcom that aired first on the ABC network from January 15, 1974 to July 19, 1984. It was one of the most successful series of the 1970s. The series presented an idealized vision of life in the 1950s and early 1960s, Midwestern United States. Happy Days became the #1 program in television in 1976 and 1977. Fonzie became one of the most merchandised characters of the 1970s, and Henry Winkler became a major star. I want you to think about the program. All in the Family started off their show singing about the good old days, and when things really got bad in the 70s, during the recession, they went back and created a series that brought America back into those good old days. The time where Archie and Edith sang about in their intro theme song. This was no accident. This is mentally where the public needed to be. The series Happy Days also spawned a number of spin-offs, including Laverne and Shirley. Laverne and Shirley was a sitcom television series that ran for 8 seasons on ABC from January 27, 1976 to May 10, 1983. There were 2 friends, also roommates, who worked as bottle cappers in the fictitious Schatz Brewery in late 1950s, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Again, another show of nostalgia, keeping suburban America trapped in the times before Nixon and all the change. I want you to think about it, really. For suburban white America, while dealing with all the changes of the 70s, the mind control was All in the Family that dealt head-on with the change, dealing with the different characters like Archie and Michael. Then the major programs that happened during the times of the recession were Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, both programs that went back into the 50s and 60s, creating the nostalgia. These were the #1 programs of the decades, and then there were a lot of other programs that went into the cultural shift that led us into the 80s, like I explained in part 4 with the sexual revolution, with programs like Mary Tyler Moore Show and Jiggle Television. White suburban America was given programming that led them back to the periods of nostalgia, while Negro programming was about giving hope of a new day and teaching the Negroes how to navigate and adapt to the culture of America. They didn't make programs like the good old times for the Negroes because those times weren't good old times for them, so they focused on programming that gave them hope. The Negro programming was about giving hope of a new day and teaching the Negroes how to navigate and adapt to the culture of America. The major part of the Negro culture was not just the television, but by its music, though. So we cannot ignore the main culture that was given through its music shows like Soul Train, which became a main driver of Negro culture. The television was a main driver that kept the people moving throughout the 70s. And in order to see how we got into the 80s, it's important to understand the mental programming that guided the demographics into that next decade. Before I dove into the 80s, I wanted to make this video highlighting the segmenting of the 2 demographics as we move through the 70s, because everything changes in the 80s. But if you don't see how they started in the 70s, it makes it hard to see how all of this was an actual agenda. It's easy to look at the world today and just look at everything as just a result of time and change. But when you actually go back and analyze what was occurring, you can directly see that none of this was by chance. Today, as a society, we are not individuals that we desired in our hearts to be. We are a result of decades of mind control that was all about guiding us into their new worlds that they were slowly creating. This new world being built was not just about the political, economical, and religious structures to be built. It was also about guiding the public's mind into their mental web that was slowly but surely program us to be Satanists. It's not possible for me to go through every instance of programming that they used against us. And we're all different, so it's impossible to cover everything. But if you personally ever want to review these programs with the understanding you now have been given, you would not be able to look at it the same. And that is a great thing. But this is not just about retraining our minds and looking back at the past, but it's to help you look at the world we currently are in the same way. The programming is a little different. The attacks are slightly different as well, because much of the mental programs they use in those decades are already locked in. They are now steering us into accepting their false messiah and the new world he will be king of. It is important that you are able to recognize what was and is now being done, and then you need to get off that train. This is why our Father in his word has consistently promoted the thoughts of being of a sound and sober mind. We are to live with a sound mind, keeping our minds fixed on our Father and his business, and not this world and their agendas and what they are searching and seeking after. We all must be on guard of our minds and protect them. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. That's Romans chapter 8, verses 5 and 6. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. Colossians chapter 3, verse 2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of Elohim. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. If we practice this diligently, we'll be ready for what's coming, and we will not be taken advantage of. So we had to go through these plots and schemes and mental manipulations in order to help us wake up to the games that are being played against us today. As we continue to go through this series, we are about to discuss the major mental shift that happened in the 80s. And if you understand all these mindsets that were placed upon us or our parents and our grandparents back in the 70s, it makes it a lot easier to wake up and identify the patterns that will get even more targeted and directed in the 80s. In your own personal life, do not live in ignorance as if you have not been affected by these agendas. If you cannot deal with this, you are lying to yourself. And though I am speaking directly in regards to the programming done in the United States, if you live abroad, I am sure you came across the same tactics, just with different specific details. The whole world has been placed under these agendas in order to lead us to where we are going. In the beginning, it was much more general, but as we move throughout time, it becomes much more personal and targeted until where we are at today, with everyone having their own algorithms. Come out of this and be holy and set apart as our Father commands. We are waking up out of this matrix and moving in righteousness towards Yahuah. We must live in truth, and that's why waking up for this mind control is so important. Yah wants and desires those who worship him to do so in spirit and in truth. That's found in John chapter 4, verse 24. In spiritual warfare, we have spiritual armor. In order to fight against the enemy, we must gird our waist with truth. You find that in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 14. We know that the truth will set us free, as John chapter 8, verse 32 tells us. The truth is important because, as prophesied in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, those who love the lie are living in a strong delusion, and they will be condemned for it. What did Yahusha say in Revelation chapter 21, verses 7 and 8? He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his Elohim, and he shall be my son. But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. You have to deal with what happens to cowards, the unbelieving, and the liars. And what is a coward exactly? A coward is a person who lacks the courage to do or endure dangerous or unpleasant things. Cowards are those who are trying to enter in through that broad gate because it's easier. These are those that choose to live through the lie and accept just enough of it that it does not bring them at odds with this world. What we have been discussing are all about the difference between living in the lie and living in the truth. And it is your decision to decide what you're going to live through. Whatever is mainstream is all about moving the world towards an agenda for the acceptance of the lawless one. And so it is your job to make sure that you do not let the mainstream generally accepted thought enter into your worldview when understanding the truth. If it is an idea that most people generally accept, I guarantee that there is a lie somewhere mixed in. And the thing is that all these lies are all about moving the world towards the acceptance of this coming satanic agenda. So Yah willing, we will continue to go over the history of our mind control so that the picture can be more plainly to see just how much manipulation we have been under. It goes throughout these last decades so that the world we were once in is no longer, and the population of the world is ready and prepared for a new world. They want us to be prepared so much for it that we cheer it on. It is important that you can recognize it and get off that path and prepare yourself for Yah's kingdom. So please, wake up and no longer follow the lies. But listen, in the end, the choice is yours. Just make sure you please make the right decision and live in strength and in wisdom and continue to prepare for the kingdom of Yah. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay, thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please make sure to like it and share this video with others. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to this channel. Yah willing, I upload every Friday. Please don't forget to follow this ministry on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on my website, truthunedited.com. I really would like to give a special thank you and shout out to those who have donated and continue to support this ministry. And I thank you for your obedience to his call on your heart. I'm humbled by your support and I'm very thankful for you. You know who you are. I sincerely thank you. You have no idea how much your support to this ministry means. Be blessed. Okay, thanks again everyone for watching. I love you all.